And the big matchup in my eyes in Class D1 was Bridgeport and Hemingford, both at the bottom end of the top 10 rankings by our coaches, 9 and 10. Bridgeport was down 20-0 at one point in this contest, came back to score the next 30 unanswered points, and down Hemingford 30-20 after trailing 20-12 at halftime. But give credit to the Bulldogs for finding a way to find the best comeback that we saw in Week 7 action last week across 8-man football. And as much as I mentioned that it could be a 3-man race at the top of D1 with Shelby Rising City, Sandy Creek, and DCS, don't count out the Bridgeport Bulldogs, because not only are their uniforms fantastic, but they also have a chance to make real noise with the amount of travel that any team has to do to get out to Bridgeport to play them. Welcome back to another episode of Small Town Ball. I'm Austin Jacobsen. We're a production of Hurrdat Sports and NEBPreps, and we had a very exciting week of Small Town Ball action from classes C1 down to 6-man, but I'll be completely honest, not as many close games as we were expecting. Now, the games are going to get better as the season continues here in the final week of the 8-man season, and as we wrap up the 11-man season in the next 2 weeks and head into the postseason for both. But this past week, pretty chalky, and we're just going to kind of run through it, give you a quick recap episode. I've been meaning to get you guys some more. I apologize for not getting these out sooner, but we are here now. We're ready to get things rolling, and we're very excited to be able to get you some great content from volleyball, football, and hopefully some softball action, as Class C1 softball will be wrapping up, or I should say just Class C softball will be wrapping up its state tournament this week with state championship on Monday morning. All right, so let's get into last week's high school football Week 7 recap, starting in Class C1 at the top. Number 1 team in the almost said country, which you probably could say for the size that Wahoo has been able to keep their leads. They win again 42-0 over Logan View Scribner Snyder. Pretty impressive mark once again by the Wahoo Warriors, but nonetheless, it's still a big win for them. They only allowed 110 rushing yards. They forced 3 fumbles, led 35-0 at halftime. Were able to kind of hold on that mark. They also were a little bit slower in their contest with Kip Brigham, but I think that was more in part to kind of the lead that they had built. So I'm not too concerned about where Wahoo is. Obviously, they're 7-0. They're the number 1 team. They're going to stay that way. Same with Central City. They are once again number 2 in the high school coaches poll after a 43-21 win over Milford. They trailed 7-6 at the end of the first quarter and 21-20 at halftime. But then the second half is when the Bison really woke up and took care of business. They handled business, winning 23-0 in the third quarter, all unanswered points, and ended up winning this one 43-21, holding Milford scoreless in the entirety of the second half. Central City and Wahoo were right now on a collision course, as we've said many times, but this was a bit more of an eyebrow-raising, but not concerning win for me if I'm looking at the grand scale of C1, because Central City responded well, especially dominating the third quarter, shutting out Milford in the fourth and third quarters. Impressive mark for the team that continues to remain at number 2. Columbus Lakeview led 21-3 at halftime in their 35-3 win over Columbus Scotus Catholic. They scored 14 unanswered points in the fourth quarter and only allowed 83 passing yards and 53 rushing yards. This is a Scotus team that was a preseason top 10 team and had been in the top 10 for the first few weeks of the polls. Now, that is not the same Scotus team we are seeing now, but this is the same Lakeview team we have seen all season long. Forceful defense, very, very potent offense at times when they need to turn it on. This Lakeview team is definitely one of the more underrated teams in C1, even at number 3, just because they are not in that upper echelon of 1 and 2 where Wahoo and Central City sit. Same with Sydney. They also dominated 46-0. They are now 7-0 out in the Panhandle, led 40-0 at the end of the first, scored 6 points in the second quarter, and it was all chalk from there. Alec Doty ended 4 for 4 for 96 passing yards and 2 touchdowns, with Reese Dorsey 6 carries for 101 yards, and Kyle Jaggers 2 carries, 52 yards, reception in there as well, with Carter Lipska 4 catches for 82 yards. Again, Sydney, Lakeview, Central City, Wahoo, that looks to be kind of your semifinal matchups if PowerPoints all shake out. But for right now, it's going to be interesting to see where these other teams that we will talk about here in a minute fall moving forward. That starts with Ashton Greenwood, who blanked Omaha Roncalli Catholic 35-0. I was able to stop by the world's greatest concession stand, as good as advertised at Roncalli. Unfortunately, Ashton Greenwood brought their own baked goods to the entire barbecue, as they had 14-0 lead at the end of the first, a 28-0 lead at halftime, and scored those final 7 to get the running clock going in the second half. Derek Tonjes was 19 of 26 for 338 passing yards and 3 scores. He also toted the rock 2 times for 21 yards and a touchdown. Cale Smith, 12 carries, 80 yards, 2 scores. He had 7 tackles on defense with a tackle for loss. And Cal Kissinger, another day in the office, 6 catches, 154 yards, and a touchdown. A lot of other receptions, a couple of interceptions by different players, including Ty Miller and Liam Curtis. The defense was impressive. 8 total tackles for loss, 3 sacks, and 2 interceptions in a 35-0 win. Now, the more impressive side of this, I believe, in the top 10 of C1 was actually in the bottom half, because we saw O'Neill dominate Schuyler 70-0. No surprise there, as O'Neill's now 7-0. Syracuse continues winning, and it looks like they will continue that winning ways unless they slip up here in the next 2 weeks. They win 40-0 over Fall City, leading 21-0 at the end of the first and 33-0 at halftime. Will Jansen had 3 carries for 140 yards and 2 touchdowns, while Will Simon ended with 1 carry for 86 yards and a score. They only allowed 54 passing yards, had 2 sacks, a fumble recovery, and an interception in the game. While Gothenburg dominated Holdridge as well, they're now 6-1. The Swedes have been a happy surprise out in central Nebraska. They allowed 4 passing yards, 182 rushing yards, just 1 rushing touchdown, and forced 4 fumbles against a Duster team that, again, not the most impressive Holdridge team that we have seen. Of course, they are still winless on the season, but a Holdridge team nonetheless that is capable of putting up some yardage. They did have a great moment that I invite you to be able to check out on our social channels at NEBPreps. They had a cancer survivor from each side playing on their high school football programs from Gothenburg and Holdridge, and they were able to give game balls for both of them, celebrate the moment that they've both been able to kind of survive the fight that they've been going through. Great stuff there out in central Nebraska in the Southwest Conference. Wrapping up the top 10, Mount Michael Benedictine held off DC West 24-20. They trailed 6-3 at the end of the first, 13-3 at halftime, and then entered the fourth quarter trailing 20-10, but then outscored DC West 14-0 in the fourth quarter. Will Schieber went 7 of 11 for 72 passing yards, had 2 turnovers, an interception and a fumble. Jed Rammel, 24 carries, 154 rushing yards, 2 scores, and Brady Quinlovan, 13 carries, 72 yards, a score, 5 catches, 56 yards, and had an interception on defense, as well as Charlie Lahara, 12 total tackles, a tackle for loss, and a sack, with Blaze Beller, 9 total tackles and a tackle for loss in the win for Mount Michael. What grit and determination we have seen from the Knights so far this season. They're 5-2. They're the 9th-ranked team coming out of last week's high school coaches poll. And now they continue to look like one of those teams that's going to be a thorn in the side when we enter the postseason in Class C1. Wrapping up the top 10, Fort Calhoun moves to 6-1, winning 27-7 over Omaha Concordia. Like we mentioned in our NEBPreps postgame show with Mike Sauter and Jacob Padilla, Class C2 was all chalk, really. There was one big contest in this week, and we'll get to that in a moment. Cedar Catholic dominated Ponca 48-0. They're now 7-0. Norfolk Catholic won by forfeit over Oakland Craig. That one was already scheduled into the season, as Oakland Craig had forfeited their season before the year began. Bishop Neumann took care of business against Conestoga 35-14. All 3 of those teams, Norfolk Catholic and Bishop Neumann, both 6-1, with Cedar Catholic 7-0. Archbishop Bergen is 6-1. They won by forfeit over Takema Herman, with Boone Central taking down St. Paul. Kind of an interesting game here for the number 5 team in C2. Boone Central was trailing at halftime 14-7, but then proceeded to outscore the Wildcats 27-7 in the second half. They had Cade Hudson going 12 of 18 for 104 passing yards and an interception. He also had 15 carries for 113 yards and 2 scores. Did have a fumble in this contest as well, with Brogan Bennis, 19 carries, 122 yards, 2 touchdowns, and Darren Dosler, 4 carries, 80 yards, a score, and defensively very impressive, 9 tackles, 6 for loss, a sack, and a fumble recovery. This was an impressive mark by Boone Central to make their way in a comeback win against a team at St. Paul that can be scrappy at times. Boone Central is the epitome of scrappy, though. 5-2 on the season, had a sluggish start because of the way their schedule rolled out, but they've now notched off a couple of really key and impactful wins recently that I think are going to make a difference for them moving forward, especially just in the team psyche. Boone Central is a team that can compete with the top, but has had some trouble beating the top of C2. That can change in the postseason, but sometimes you have to go through the mud to get there, and they definitely had to get through the mud in this one to take down St. Paul. Ord won 63-7 over Centura. They led 48-0 at halftime. No surprise there. A lot of great stats from them. Kearney Catholic held off Mitchell 22-11. They led 16-0 at halftime and 22-3 at the end of the third quarter. GICC got back to winning, dominating Cross County 52-14, leading 45-0 at halftime. Lincoln Lutheran took down Palmyra 34-10, and Doniphan Trumbull won 62-28 over Fillmore Central. This game with Doniphan Trumbull, I keep my eyes on the Cardinal because they are so intriguing to watch. 28-20 at halftime was that score between the two. Then a 20-0 third quarter domination by Doniphan Trumbull, and then finally outscored in the fourth 14-8. They won the second half 34-8. After leading by only 8 points at halftime. The better team definitely woke up and showed up for Doniphan Trumbull there at the end over Fillmore Central. Parker Vogt went 23 of 33 for 315 yards, 6 touchdown passes, an interception, and had 10 carries for 60 yards and a score. Really, really great stuff as always, especially padding those stats as we see quite often there for DT. All right, so into 8-man football. As we mentioned, they're entering the final week of their regular season before the postseason will start, and then the reseeding of the postseason in 2 weeks lies ahead. Shelby Rising City still remains at number 1 as they're 7-0, 56-18 win over Meade. Sandy Creek took down Exeter Milligan Friends 63-12, leading 35-0 at halftime and 56-6 at the end of the third quarter. DCS had a 62-14 win over Alma, leading 49-6 at the half and 56-6 at the third quarter. You did see Ethan Latta get back into his offensive ways too. 11 carries, 119 rushing yards, 4 scores, had a catch for 43 yards and another interception, which is no surprise for those who have been following Latta's career so far. DCS, Sandy Creek, and Shelby Rising City are all completely on a collision course for who can take down who when we get into this next kind of phase of the postseason. It's going to be a while before we see these teams play each other, but if any of them were to slip up, and obviously in a postseason, one and you're done. But these are the 3 teams that I'm really looking at that I think could be the last 3 or 4 teams part of that semifinals remaining. I'm very interested to see how the postseason PowerPoints will shake out, to see where all of these guys will set up. Because in my view, I think that we would be kind of disserviced if we didn't see 2 of these 3 in the state championship themselves. But we'll see how that ends up. The biggest game in 8-man 1 was Crofton taking down Wausau Osmond 50-12. Wausau Osmond was the number 4 team. Crofton was the 7 team, and it was a 30-6 halftime lead for Crofton. They outscored Wausau Osmond 20-6 in the third quarter as well, with Matt Carlson of Wausau Osmond just 9 of 18 for 125 passing yards. Had a good day on the ground, 27 carries, 110 yards, and 2 scores. But nonetheless, this was an impressive mark going on and keeping on for Crofton to be able to get a top 10 win, and one of the only ones we see across all of the smaller classes last week. Plainview wins over Stanton 52-8 with Kobe Martins 15 of 23, 237 yards and 3 scores, with Bloomfield taking down Niobrara Verdigre 52-26. Again, a dominant performance by the Bees, led 28-8 at halftime and 40-8 at the end of the third quarter. We do see that obviously Bloomfield did not have Brock Genital in this game, but they were able to keep their stats pretty even across the board, with Gavin Hansen going 4 of 5, 122 passing yards and 3 scores. Keaton Gilsdorf, 14 carries for 88 yards and a touchdown, and Max Bruce, 11 carries, 70 yards and a score as well. Thayer Central took down Tri-County 68-22 to move to 6-1 on the season. They led 20-0 at the end of the first and 48-6 at halftime. And the big matchup in my eyes in Class D1 was Bridgeport and Hemingford, both at the bottom end of the top 10 rankings by our coaches, 9 and 10. Bridgeport was down 20-0 at one point in this contest. came back to score the next 30 unanswered points and down Hemingford 30-20 after trailing 20-12 at halftime and outscored Hemingford 12-0 at the end of the fourth quarter. For Bridgeport, Nicholas Wiebert was 7 of 11 for 95 yards and a score, 12 carries, 42 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 13 total tackles, with James Jeffords 22 carries, 218 yards, and 2 scores as well. Defensively, Landon Dean had 13 tackles and 3 for loss, as Hemingford was slowed down significantly, but their team had 3 fumble recoveries and 4 forced fumbles, definitely leading to that early stretch of Bridgeport having to climb their way back. But give credit to the Bulldogs for finding a way to find the best comeback that we saw in Week 7 action last week across 8-man football. Impressive stuff from the two Panhandle teams, and as much as I mentioned that it could be a 3-man race at the top of D1 with Shelby Rising City, Sandy Creek, and DCS, don't count out the Bridgeport Bulldogs, because not only are their uniforms fantastic, but they also have a chance to make real noise with the amount of travel that any team has to do to get out to Bridgeport to play them. Could be a difference maker when we get into the postseason. All right, in 8-man 2, Central Valley took down Palmer 52-6 to remain unbeaten on the season. Archangels Catholic dominated Fullerton 46-0. St. Mary's handled North Central 74-8. Gage Hedstrom had another impressive stat day. 12 of 18, 238 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, 8 carries, 112 yards, and 2 touchdowns as well. Hitchcock County is 7-0. As they win 54-6 over Maywood Hayes Center. Lawrence Nelson dominates High Plains Community 73-8, and Howells Dodge blanks Osceola 58-0. On the back half of the top 10 from last week, Wynot wins over Winside 73-6, and finally the 8 matchup, Neely Oakdale gets upset by Elgin Public Pope John 38-26, and Neely Oakdale trailed throughout this contest. They were down 14-0 at the end of the first, led 20-14 at halftime, outscored then 8-6 in the third and 16-0 in the fourth. They just couldn't get things going in that second half after taking a brief lead. Cooper Earhart was 21 of 44 for 318 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, but 2 interceptions as well. Did have 15 tackles on defense. He was looking for Corbin Hofer more often than not with 8 catches, 175 yards, and 2 scores. Andrew Henry had 6 catches for 96 yards and 15 tackles. They did allow 258 rushing yards and threw 2 picks in the contest, as the number 8 team will drop out of the polls in this week. Always been impressed by Anselmo Myrna. They find another way to win, taking down Twin Loop 46-27, and Elmwood Murdoch won over Cedar Bluffs 66-18. Finally, in 6-man action, the biggest contest we saw last week was between Stewart and Hampton, with the number 2 team winning over the Hawks 53-20. It was in control for the Mustangs the entire time. Or correction, the Broncos, as Stewart won 53-20 over Hampton. Garden County, the top team, took down Layton in another top 10 matchup, 68-18. Red Cloud handled Silver Lake 67-37. SEM dominated Paxton 54-13. Southwest and Houston Billiter 55-12 over Juanita Palisade. They led 34-6 at halftime. Billiter was 6 of 10 for 130 passing yards, 3 scores, did throw a pick, but had 3 carries for 63 yards and a touchdown. We saw Wallace as well dominate Med Valley 70-33, and Juanita Palisade, as we mentioned, falling to Southwest 55-12. All right, as we wrap up, very quick and fast-paced action from last week. Here are your top 10 ratings as they stand right now, released Sunday night, from our Nebraska Preps High School Coaches Poll. In C1, Wahoo, Central City, Lakeview, and Sydney all remain in the top 4 in that order. Ashland Greenwood remains at 5, O'Neill 6, Syracuse 7, Gothenburg at 8, Mount Michael Benedictine at 9, and Fort Calhoun at 10, with Aurora receiving votes this week. No changes in this week's poll. In C2, we do see a little bit of change moving. Cedar Catholic remains at number 1, Norfolk Catholic at 2. We have Archbishop Bergen at 3, moving up from 4. Bishop Newman fell from 3 to 5 despite a victory. Boone Central even jumped up a spot to 4 from 5. Ord remains at 6, Kearney Catholic 7, Grand Island Central Catholic at 8, Lincoln Lutheran at 9, and Doniphan Trumbull at 10. Both Malcolm and West Point Beamer are receiving votes in this week's poll. In 8-man 1, it is the same at the top as we have seen for 1, 2, and 3, Shelby Rising City, Sandy Creek, and Dundee County Stratton. Crofton elevates from 7 to 4 after their big win earlier this week over Wausau Osmond. Plainview remains at 5, Bloomfield at 6. Thayer Central moves up 1 spot to 8. Wausau Osmond does drop down to number 8. Thayer Central at 7, Wausau Osmond at 8. Bridgeport stays at number 9 despite a top 10 win, and Ravenna, undefeated on the season, was receiving votes last week. They are 7-0 and number 10 in this week's coaches poll. In 8-man 2, Central Valley is at the top at 1, Archangels Catholic at 2, St. Mary's 3, Hitchcock County at 4, Howells, Dodge, and Lawrence Nelson flip positions at 5 and 6, and Selma Myrna moves up 2 positions from 9 to 7, Elmwood Murdoch up from 10 to 8 now in this week's poll. Loomis is back in the top 10 after receiving votes again last week. Sandhills Thedford moves into the top 10 as well after beating an unbeaten Mullen team, as Mullen is continuing to receive votes in this week's poll. Finally, in the 6-man top 10, Garden County 1, Stewart 2, Red Cloud 3, SEM at 4, Southwest 5, Layton 6, Silver Lake remains at 7. Hampton does move up 1 spot and trades places with Wallace at 8. Wallace moves down to 9, and Juanita Palisade remains at number 10, with Pawnee City, the lone team receiving votes outside of the top 10. All right, that's another episode and quick recap of Week 7. Week 8 action is just upon us as we will have the 8-man final regular season week wrapping up. Postseason begins next week, and of course, then all the 11 and 6-man action will wrap up next week in Week 9. Exciting stuff. Very much looking forward to it. If you're ever looking for more, you can check out hurrdatsports.com. And of course, all of our social channels at Hurrdat Sports and NEBPreps. Until next time, we'll see you for another episode of Small Town Ball.